We are back in Creative Cloud Audition Lesson 9, Part 2. This is channel mapping in the Multitrack Editor. It shows us 64% complete in the book, and that's where we're picking back up. Okay, so the channel mapping feature is available for all the effects in the Waveform Editor and Multitrack Editor, but it's usually used for multitrack productions and is for mapping any effect input to any that should be any effect output to any effect input. No, they did mean it that way. Any effect input to any effect input and any effect output to any effect output. And that gets used a lot in surround mixes because of effects in particular channels, but it can also be useful for stereo. So we're going to open back up the multi-track session, but we're sure we didn't save any changes, so we know it's back to the beginning. Solo the main drums track, and we're going to go over to the effects, and we'll extend it so we can see all of the information. And we're going to put in insert one's reverb, convolution reverb. From the impulse, not presets, we'll choose massive cavern and width 300 and mix 70%. Okay. Now we will select a portion so we can loop. And play it so we hear what it sounds like. I'm in the wrong. No. I'm going to restore to default, reset to saved layout. Yep, that's good. This should be letting me create a loop. Why can I not? Okay, so I figured out what was going on. I am not in the time select tool up here. I was in the move tool. So I'm going to switch back to time select. Now I can select an area to create a loop. There we go. And I'll play this. And now it's looping. Okay, let's go back to the effect. Edit effect, and now we have the switches to the channel map editor button. So I'm going to press that. And for left, we're now going to say to right. And then right to left. So the output channels are reversed, which will reverse the reverb stereo output image. While it's playing, I'm going to click Reset Routing. So you can hear that difference. Especially if you are wearing headphones, you'll hear the collapsing or narrowing of the stereo image. It's going to be a little harder to hear on speakers. That's part of why we say do a lot of this editing with headphones. Okay, now we're going to close all to undo this. And do not save. Now, when you're using the channel map editor for 5.1 surround, you can direct effects outputs. With stereo, it's only relevant with effects that generate different audio for left and right outputs, like reverb, echo, and modulation effects. We're not likely to use this in film right now at this level of editing for doing initial mixes, but it may come into play later. It's good to just know where it exists. So you can just create more interesting stereo images. You have to be careful with dialogue because you want to make sure your dialogue always comes out of both channels to some extent, because of if people have blown a left or right that's blown, you want to make sure they can still hear some of dialogue. Okay, so moving on to the Multitrack Editor effects rack. So both rack effects in waveform and multitrack have some similarities, but there are also some differences. There are 2 extra buttons at the top for Multitrack Editor to switch between viewing clip-based effect and track-based effects. So the essential sound panel is where a lot of overlap comes in with what you've been doing likely in Premiere for doing sound. It gives shortcuts to effects automatically added to the effect racks. And then you can make adjustments to the effect rack in the Essential Sound panel. And that is over here, Essential Sounds. So I'm just going to open this back up so I can show you some of these things. So when we click on the effects rack, that's where you see the track effect or clip effects. So that's normally next to Media Browser. You could also go to Window and Effects Rack if it was not present. Window, Effects Rack, now we can see it, and that's where you see the difference between clip effects and rack effects. So you can change a clip effect to just this one clip. So this comes into play a lot if you have like one person who only says 2 lines and you didn't want to give them their entire own track, but you needed to adjust their audio. You could do it to just the clip, and then you could copy the effects over and paste them on another clip. So I'll just throw anything on here. So you can see there's a chorus effect on this one clip. And if I added something to the track rack, say a hard limiter, doesn't really matter, that shows up under track effects. So you can see the difference there. When you use Essential Sound to do different presets, it basically is clip effects, but in the Essential Sound panel. These come in a lot within dialogue, not so much in music, for our uses in film. So let's just pretend for a second that this is a dialogue track, this bass. Then there are a lot of useful presets for Essential Sound. And then you can create, let's say, podcast voice, whatever, doesn't really matter what I'm doing. What you can do is once you find, if you find one is great for this particular person, you can save it as a preset. So you could save it as that character's preset.